Medicines are substances that are used to relieve symptoms, treat and prevent diseases. The introduction of synthetic pharmaceuticals started with aspirin in 1897. Nearly 50 years later, in the 1940s, the first antibiotic and first commercially formulated antimalarial medicines were introduced. A rapid growth of medicines for infectious disease, cardiovascular conditions, and a wide range of other conditions followed. WHO published the first model list of essential drugs in 1977. At the time, there were 208 individual medicines which were recommended for the safe and effective treatment of the majority of communicable and non-communicable diseases. But did we always know if these medicines were safe to use? During the early 1960s, medicines were regarded as a fix-all for everything, with little thought to how safe they were. In most countries, medicines were very poorly regulated, if at all, except a few. So what changed? In 1957, a small German company, Grünenthal, marketed a medicine called thalidomide. The medicine was sold as a completely safe and non-toxic sedative to be used as a remedy for morning sickness in pregnant women. The company marketed the medicine aggressively, with huge sales in over 47 countries around the world. The medicine seemed to do what was claimed, relieving symptoms of nausea and aiding sleep. What the public didn't know was that Grünenthal had never actually carried out the appropriate safety test in clinical trials to see if the drug really was as non-toxic and safe as they claimed. Although the medicine targeted nursing and pregnant women, it was never actually tested on expectant mothers. In the absence of regulation and systems to monitor the safety of medicines in the market, the thalidomide disaster was a tragedy waiting to happen. Finally, after a long battle initiated by clinicians and parents of the children who were exposed to thalidomide, the drug was withdrawn from the market in 1961.
Innovation will help us to achieve universal health coverage, and in the past several decades we have proven that. For instance, it's with innovation that smallpox was eradicated because of the vaccines, and it's with innovation that polio is on the verge of eradication. And we expect more products to be produced that can help us achieve the vision of universal health coverage by 2030. And one of the candidates now is the meningitis A vaccine. But when we talk about innovation, I think it's not just the products only. We have to include the delivery too. But in addition to that, safety and effectiveness is important. In pharmacovigilance, we started it in 1968, 50 years ago, and we piloted pharmacovigilance in 10 countries. This is collecting data on how the product is behaving and analyzing that for use in order to avoid any unintended consequences. And we, at the same time, build the capacity of countries so they can do the pharmacovigilance. But at the same time, we have a database that all countries store, and we share with all countries to benefit from the experiences of other countries. You know, always when you have a product, it has positive intentions, but sometimes there are unintended consequences too. So any product should be under surveillance, and we need to have data on how the product actually behaves. And that's why WHO 50 years ago started this monitoring mechanism, or the pharmacovigilance. And we have now more than 160 countries. And that is helping us to use the products for the intended purpose, but when there are unintended consequences, to take action immediately.
The first discussion on the WHO program for international drug monitoring started in 1962, about 6 months after the thalidomide babies were reported. So between 62 and 67, a series of resolutions were passed on the topic, and then in 68, there was an agreement signed between the US government and the World Health Organization. So 68 to 70 was a pilot phase, and this was located in Alexandria in the US, when we benefited a lot with the support of 10 pilot countries and the US government's grant and the material support from the US government as well. So these were formative years when the pilot project discussed the reporting form, the terminologies of adverse drug events, a drug dictionary, a computer system for managing data, and so on. Then in 71, the program moved to Geneva. But then between 75 and 78, the operational aspect of the program had to be moved to Sweden. And thanks to the agreement with the Kingdom of Sweden, the Uppsala Monitoring Center took on the operational role of the program.
The Uppsala Monitoring Center was set up in 1978 as the Foundation WHO Collaborating Center for International Drug Monitoring. Today we are a thriving organization of 100 people working here in Uppsala, and we are celebrating 4 decades of scientific progress. And we've also been very successful, I think, in building a global network of countries working together for safer use of medicines and for safer patients. And that's what we call pharmacovigilance. That's what we do.
I think Sweden had a very strong role in the international program from the very beginning. And that was due both to the contributions by Åke Liljestrand and Barbro Westerholm. She was very much respected.
Based on the agreement between WHO and the Kingdom of Sweden, the Uppsala Monitoring Center was charged with the responsibility of maintaining and further developing the WHO Global Database of Reports of Adverse Drug Reactions, Vigibase. Vigibase now holds over 18 million anonymized reports of suspected adverse effects of medicines from over 150 countries. Information in Vigibase is recorded in a structured form so that data are standardized and can be retrieved easily for analysis. By pooling data from multiple countries, evidence needed to detect potential medicine safety signals is generated and shared. Before they reach the global database, reports of adverse drug reactions are reviewed nationally, sometimes resulting in local regulatory actions. Although Vigibase data is more heterogeneous than data from national pharmacovigilance databases, due, for example, to different medical practices and regulatory requirements, it offers opportunities to make comparisons of countries and to identify and analyze differences between countries or regions. This gives the database broad global population coverage, although there is disproportionate representation of a few countries within the total number of reports, and other countries have higher reporting rates relative to population size than others. A number of new products will be launched exclusively in low and middle income countries, or simultaneously in both low and middle income countries and in high income countries, with little experience from advanced settings for low and middle income countries to rely upon. Low and middle income countries must therefore be supported to introduce new products, to identify, assess and adequately manage the risks associated with these products. However, given the limited resources and the enormous tasks facing us, how do we prioritize? WHO is advocating a risk-based prioritization for pharmacovigilance activities for low and middle-income countries.
So access to medicines has improved in many countries around the world, but the same thing doesn't happen when you're talking about safety. We all want the medicines that are available to the population to be quality assured, to be safe, to be efficacious, and at the end of the day also to be affordable. But what we have seen is very uneven, because the clinical trials that develop new drugs, they are made in developed countries, most of them. And then when you apply these same medications to populations of where like heat may make a difference, humidity, and patterns of consumption make a difference, you may have side effects, adverse effects that you don't see in the developed world. And what we have seen in the past years is that there is a gap between what you see in terms of what we call pharmacovigilance in developed countries and in developing countries. So we have, for example, lack of reporting for adverse effects. So if a person is taking a medicine and has an adverse effect, has what we call popularly a side effect, and there's no mechanism where this can be informed back to the authorities, to the health authorities, you never get a record of the problems that you have. So it's very important that countries have set up, and WHO is reinforcing and supporting countries with technical assistance and guidelines and so on, to set up safety vigilance, what we call pharmacovigilance, which will help countries to detect early if there are problems with medicines, and there are easy ways where the patients can actually report their side effects. This is a super important part of the access to medicines agenda as we move thinking that access to medicines is part of universal health coverage, and it's a right. Everyone should have access to the technologies they need when they need it and should not go bankrupt for it, but they also should have access to safe medication. This is just to say that pharmacovigilance is an integral part of universal health coverage, because it's the only way that you can ensure that the drugs that are on the market actually do more benefit than harm to patients.
The biggest strategy we use at this point in time is to educate healthcare workers on the need to be vigilant and to report drug-related problems, in addition to doing root cause analysis as to why. Most often, from a developing point of view, if I were living in the US and a patient reported that I'm not feeling well, the first question I would ask is, describe how you're feeling. But in a developing country, if you told me that I took a drug and I'm not feeling well, the first thing I'll ask you is, where did you get it from? Who prescribed it? Have you used it as prescribed? Before even thinking of the side effects of the product. Because in our setting, the quality of the drug is key, and whether the right drug was prescribed, in addition to whether the correct product, the product was used at the right dose.
All over the world, countries struggle for resources for pharmacovigilance. If you had $1, where would you put that? When that's all you're going to have for pharmacovigilance, what would you do with that dollar? That is going to be our smart approach and our advice to low and middle income countries going forward.
We are exploring the use of even phones, because phones are everywhere, how we can utilize that in terms of reporting. So I'm looking for pharmacovigilance that it is really going to expand in the coming years.
And actually, most of the importance of the pharmacovigilance is actually what we can do with it, with the reports they made, and basically that's actually what we're starting to do. So making all the professionals more aware of why it is important. But you know that there are a lot of things to do in you know, with the trainings, with some workshops, the way we communicate information or safety information. So there are some communication barriers that might be actually that becomes one of the most important things, because okay, we can do a lot with the information we receive, but if we are not able or have a good communication service, then it's like, all right, what you have done, nobody knows, and nobody, okay, some people hears about pharmacovigilance, but they're not quite sure, and of what is that center doing.
We're marking 50 years of the WHO International Drug Monitoring Program this year. We now have 150 member states who contribute data to a central database, which means we've got over 18 million case reports of safety signals or safety concerns, which sounds very impressive, and indeed it is, but it's not just enough to have the data. We need to know what to do with it, how to use it, how to interpret it, and how to advise patients, consumers, health professionals and countries on the basis of what we know. So going forward, it's not just enough to have the data at all. We have to have systems in place that allow countries to interpret it, know what they're seeing, and know what to do as a result. We also need to expand the experience that we've gained from monitoring safety of medicines to include monitoring vaccines really carefully, monitoring diagnostic tests and monitoring medical devices. The way of the future and the treatment of the future is probably going to be around a patient having a diagnostic test that determines which medicine is most appropriate for their needs. So we need to bring all the safety issues together and make sure that as WHO we're providing the best advice globally, and that we're also supporting countries to provide advice to clinicians, patients and consumers. That's the only way we'll get to the Sustainable Development Goal target for access to essential medicines of safety and quality for all by 2030.
Many years have passed since the thalidomide catastrophe, and it is now 50 years since the start of the WHO Programme for International Drug Monitoring. The programme has provided support to member states to help build national pharmacovigilance programs and integrate pharmacovigilance into public health programs and national medicines regulatory systems. The WHO Programme for International Drug Monitoring has provided a platform in which member states can network and exchange thoughts, information on medicinal products and best practices.
The most important achievement in my view for WHO in pharmacovigilance these last 15 years is the integration of pharmacovigilance within public health programs like HIV, TB, malaria. We have worked with these public health programs to develop the appropriate methodologies whereby these programs could collect safety data and look at it periodically and also use it to inform their own treatment guidelines and policies.
Through a robust pharmacovigilance system and international dialogue, medicines can be used more safely across the globe. Thalidomide is now back on the market for a different indication. The risks, however, remain because while they may be understood well in some countries, in others, the warnings may be less understood or regulated. Thanks to a drug monitoring program and safety net, these patients now have access to a medicine that would otherwise be denied for fear of harm. Pharmacovigilance systems are the doors for access to safer medicines worldwide.